Jim Cooper served 20 years in Congress, representing 2 different districts. The New York Times once called him a lonely voice for civility in an ugly era. And they called it ugly then. Cooper, the civilian, pulls no punches these days when talking politics. And he's come to a chilling conclusion.
I actually think both political parties are dead. First, more people identify as independents than ever before. It's like 43%. And if you look at the Republican Party, it's simply unrecognizable. If you were to ask Lamar Alexander, Bill Haslam, Bill Frist, Bob Corker, this is not the Republican Party that they knew. As for the Democrats, we've tended to be disorganized and leaderless and things like that, except when we've had a president in the White House. So parties are, when you think about it, an old-fashioned way of organizing people, kind of in the days pre-literacy, pre-television, when you just had a party label, an elephant or a donkey you stick on something. But what matters is, and Lamar has the definition of politics, it's called getting the talk right. When you and your friends and neighbors start discussing things and saying, what would the best thing to do be? And that's not partisan. Nobody is born a Democrat or Republican. You're born an American if you're lucky, and then most of the rest of the world wants to come here because they appreciate what we've got.
For years, he's tried to head off serious Nashville problems at the pass. If you weren't listening then, you might want to now. I'm Demetria Kalodimos. It's Banner & Company. Congressman Cooper, I've always got to think of you in those terms. Is that still how people address you on the street?
No, even when I was a congressman, I liked Jim or Jimbo, Jim Bob, anything's fine. Hey, you.
Are you like a retired athlete, still passionate about the game, but unable to suit up?
You know, that's a good description. Sometimes I use one day a rooster, next day a feather duster.
I like that better.
I'm fascinated with politics. I still think it's vitally important. There are things that are far more important. The ministry is more important, for example, but I happened to get lucky early in life and serve in politics and stayed for a pretty long time, thanks to the courtesy of Tennessee voters.
But it was your birthright, wasn't it? Your dad was a governor. Your granddad was a mayor and Speaker of the House?
Mm-hmm. I am from a political family, so I knew some of the rules, but my father died when I was 14, and he had been governor last time in World War II. My father, we skipped a generation. He was actually a World War I veteran, believe it or not. So my dad was born in 1895, which is kind of spooky. I learned a lot from him, though. He thought that if you were lucky in life, you might have one chance to run and win. And my chance came surprisingly early, like when I was 27.
Were there any pearls of wisdom?
Well, it's actually an easier thing than you think. A lot of people make it too complicated. You just got to be nice to people and work hard and be sincere and honest. That shouldn't be too hard. These are kind of the values you're supposed to learn in kindergarten, but some people apparently have forgotten them. Yeah.
You got the lion's share of your formal education outside of the state of Tennessee, right? Mm-hmm. Was that deliberate on the part of your family, or because your dad was a public figure, or what was the thinking there?
Well, it was kind of an accident. We started at public schools in Shelbyville, and they were fine because that was back in the day of, we call them old maid school teachers, who were absolutely fabulous. And if you look at Shelbyville in that era, it was kind of a golden age. It wasn't just our family, but all the kids did extraordinarily well in school. My father had a terrible temper, and he fell out with the Webb School, which was in our county, in the school where he went and his father went, my grandfather. But believe it or not, when they dropped Greek, my father thought that we should never set foot on campus because both he and his dad had learned Latin and Greek there, and he thought their standards were falling apart. This was in the 1960s, so we didn't set foot on campus. We went to school much like Webb, only up in Massachusetts, that still had Latin and Greek. So I spent a lot of years doing that, and it absolutely has been no use to me whatsoever.
You're talking to a Greek girl here, and you're saying Greek is of no use?
Excuse me. Demetria, you and Chris Clark were 2 Greek Americans who've excelled in our media markets here. Now, you speak modern Greek.
Yeah.
So This
Yours-
is ancient Greek.
Right.
We did not learn how to speak it. We learned how to read it. It's like Homer and things like that.
Boarding school. I mean, are the movies and the tales true?
I loved it because it was pure academics. It was single sex then, only boys, and that was the worst part. But it made you appreciate the opposite sex perhaps more than you should. So I went to a normal college. I went to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and that was fabulous. I remember the first visit I made to the campus. I didn't have a ride to campus. I was interviewing for a scholarship, and there was this beautiful girl who looked like she was a co-ed, and she offered me a ride, and I was in love from the start. But it did focus my attention on schooling. I spent a lot of time learning a lot of things at Groton.
Yeah. And then was it sort of preordained that you were going to do the Rhodes Scholar, Oxford, Harvard track?
Well, I was always a good student, and that has its pluses and minuses. I'm really good in a library, but you have to have people skills too. And my mother really gets the credit for that because she could charm anybody. And my grandfather, who is oftentimes overlooked. John J. Hooker, a famous local personality, described him as the most charming person he had ever met in his life. And my father was not as appreciative of that as he could have been. My grandfather's extraordinary skills, because he was elected as Speaker of the House the first day he was in the state legislature.
What?
So
He was a rookie and elected speaker?
the first day. So that's amazing. He'd only lived in Shelbyville for 2 years before they made him mayor. So he was a remarkable personality.
Yeah, I bet. When you first ran, do you remember what the hot issue was and why you think you broke through?
The first issue was, who the hell are you? Because the favorites were Tommy Burnett, who is a very prominent state legislator.
Who had a bit of a checkered career.
Well, it became more checkered as the race went on because other things happened legally against him. Then there was a Republican mystery candidate. We didn't know who it was. And, Senator Howard Baker was the then Senate Majority Leader of the U.S. Senate, so a very powerful figure. And it turned out to be his daughter, Sissy. But she ended up having a primary, and we were both the nominees of our party for the general election. And I ended up with 66% of the vote. So it wasn't even close. But we, of course, didn't know this at the time. We thought they must have had some secret plan to win. And they turned out to have a secret plan to lose. But it was just one of those things. Most of politics is luck and timing. As I've always said, you can be the greatest candidate in the world and not make it. Or you can be pretty weak and even be president of the United States.
Yeah. What about the timing now? We just saw Democrats do fairly well around the country. Why?
I was very pleased with the sweep in Virginia and New Jersey. I think that bodes well. American politics has always been a pendulum swinging back and forth, and I think the peak of Republican power is now past us. We're seeing the swing back. I hope that persists, but the honest view I have, and I can state this more clearly now that I'm out of politics, is I actually think both political parties are dead. First, more people identify as independents than ever before. It's like 43%. And if you look at the Republican Party, it's simply unrecognizable. If you were to ask Lamar Alexander, Bill Haslam, Bill Frist, Bob Corker, this is not the Republican Party that they knew. And,
Why aren't we hearing it from them?
well, I'm actually working on that. We'll see if there could be a development next year on that, because I think they're, from what I can tell, and I'm not a close friend of theirs, but my guess is all regular Republicans are pretty much disgusted with what's going on. As for the Democrats, we've tended to be disorganized and leaderless and things like that, except when we've had a president in the White House. So but parties are, when you think about it, an old-fashioned way of organizing people, kind of in the days pre-literacy, pre-television, when you just had a party label, an elephant or a donkey you stick on something. But what matters is, and Lamar has the definition of politics, it's called getting the talk right. When you and your friends and neighbors start discussing things and saying, what would the best thing to do be? And that's not partisan. Nobody is born a Democrat or Republican. Mm-hmm. You're born an American if you're lucky, and then most of the rest of the world wants to come here because they appreciate what we've got. So I think if people put their hearts to it and argue or talk in good faith, then they come up with good solutions. I think Tennessee's always been an example of this. Some of our best governors were really politically unidentifiable. If you ask people today, was Phil Bredesen or Ned McWhirter a Democrat or Republican, half the Republicans think they were Republican because they were just solid. There have been a number of great Republican governors who were just solid because what matters, and local offices are supposed to be non-partisan. What matters is solving problems. And unfortunately, both parties have kind of forgotten about that. And many people just run for office so they can be a bigger Instagram star. And social media is fun, but it's not governance. We have to solve problems.
Yeah. So do you actually see in our lifetimes no parties existing? People running as individuals? How could that work?
Well, my personal theory is since the internet is so powerful, there might be 1,000 parties or 100 parties, or because everybody has their own particular flavor. Now, when I grew up, Democrats had very conservative Democrats and super liberal Democrats. Same for Republicans. A northern Republican was usually more liberal than a southern Democrat. But those were big tent parties back then. They welcomed everyone. They wanted to grow. And today, it's more like the political scientist dream of ideologically pure parties that try to exclude anyone who isn't exactly of the same flavor as their preferred taste. And that's a good way to shrink your party and to lose elections instead of have a big tent party and include everyone who wants to join you. Because human beings are complicated. You know that as well as I do. When you broadcast all of Middle Tennessee and really a multi-state area, because the signal carries well into Kentucky and probably down into Alabama. We're a gloriously diverse people, and we should celebrate that. Mm-hmm. And we should find what's in our common interest and common good and work hard toward that. I worry that our greatest problems are formed when both parties agree to be irresponsible. And I'm particularly budget-minded. And I think the national debt and our annual deficit are two of the sort of almost criminal problems that no one wants to talk about, no one wants to face. But we're burdening our kids right now with a World War II-sized debt, even though we don't feel like we just won World War II. After that great war, we all banded together to lower the debt. And today we have that similar sized debt, but no one's wanting to band together to deal with it.
We are, weeks away from a special election for Congress, and we have candidates who won't appear to debate, won't even answer questionnaires from the media. We have a sitting congressperson who doesn't have an office presence. What's going on? And could you ever do that yourself? Ignore the people? At least some people see it that way.
Well, I tried to have, an office in the public library downtown where people could park for free. I wanted to see people, but that was kind of viewed today as the old-fashioned way of doing things. Today, it's all in the media. I'm very hopeful for this upcoming election. We'll probably have the only election in America during this special time period as a result of Mark Green's resignation, which I remind you was his second effort to resign.
Yeah.
But now it's an excellent, hard-fought race. I hope the Democrat will win. I've been a contributor to her campaign. I think that it's up to the voters, though. And what really matters is voter turnout. As I've always said, you get the candidate that you vote for. And it should be obvious and clear. But so many people simply don't turn out. If you look at President Trump's recent election in 2024, he got 31% of the eligible adult American voters who are registered. More people chose not to vote than voted for President Trump. So is that really a mandate? It's a plurality, but we are supposed to have majority rule. And so often, Nashville is about 40% of the vote in this upcoming race. If Nashvillians just voted in extraordinary numbers, they could probably determine the outcome. Having been raised in Shelbyville, Tennessee, I've always advocated let's pay attention to the rural areas too. And I think the political center of gravity in all these districts for Nashville now are outside of Nashville. So I'm hoping that Nashville candidates can overcome that.
Let's talk for a second about President Trump, because I remember sitting down with you over on Nob Hill and you talking about the emoluments clause. And I confess, I had to look it up and say, what is this guy talking about? Has that just defied your wildest fears?
Well, it's in the Constitution, and many people forget what's in our founding document, which is arguably one of the most important pieces of paper ever written by human beings. And the president has been in flagrant violation of that for a long time. When he controls the Justice Department, however, you're not seeing that as clearly as you would in other administrations. So, for example, the Nixon administration, because he did not try to have this incredible overreach. And you're also seeing an unusually compliant Supreme Court. They're issuing opinions now on the shadow docket that are not written. There are no opinions. It's just a ruling, a decree. And it's really a scary time. I've just been teaching at Vanderbilt Law School, and lawyers are pretty much freaked out by this because this should not be happening, certainly not on this scale. And the idea that a president has immunity from pretty much anything he does, like ever, is just kind of shocking, because that's a get-out-of-jail-free card that no leader probably should have. Now, we don't want endless lawfare and litigation between parties, but there has to be some legal standard, and the rule of law is supposed to be king in this country, not an individual.
I asked another lawyer that was sitting in that chair last week whether we're going to have a larger Supreme Court, and he quickly said no. What do you think?
Well, Franklin Roosevelt thought about that in the 30s, and that did not work at all. Americans tend to be pretty fundamentalist and traditionalist. We like what we've had because it's worked pretty darn well for 250 years almost. Let's stick with that. What matters is that if a judge rules according to what the law says, not according to who appointed them. And it's sad now today when people have to ask, who put you in office, as if that's the way you think. Because you should be independent, you should do what's right, not what's according to your political patron.
It's Banner and Company. I'm Demetria Kalodimos. We'll be right back. What worries you locally? I've heard you say that Nashville is becoming a colony. In what way?
Well, when Nashville was really growing and thriving, for example, in the civil rights era, when we learned how to manage that huge issue and do so in a peaceable way, local leaders and locally owned companies banded together to do what was the right thing. They encouraged our political leaders to respond peacefully and to let the nonviolent marchers march, to let people eat at integrated lunch counters. That shouldn't be hard, but that was not a solution that other southern cities followed. Birmingham had terrible trouble. So we were brilliant to go metro back in the 60s, and that allowed the city to be county-wide. Now I'm thinking that we probably need to be larger because the Nashville metropolitan area is really a 6 or 7 county thing, and that's what people think of when they come to Nashville. They don't necessarily respect the county line. And many people fled Nashville for reasons that they're a little bit embarrassed about. Sometimes it was white flight. Sometimes it was just against property taxes. Sometimes it was wanting a little bit more affordable housing. There are lots of different reasons, but when most of our policemen and firemen can't afford to live in our own county, that's an issue. Same with school teachers. So there are a lot of things that we can fix with people of goodwill, but see, today when you have these giant multinational companies having a large presence here, the headquarters is not here. I remember when I was fighting the gerrymandering of Nashville several years ago, I would go to the company headquarters and knock on the door, and oftentimes there'd be somebody who really didn't know much about Nashville at all, and they certainly didn't care. They cared about their shareholders who are all over the world. But I'm particularly worried, for example, with, and I hope Oracle does locate its world headquarters here as it has promised. But
do you think it's tenuous?
Well, I'm not an expert on this, but what evidence is there so far? They're planning on building a few $1 billion on the East Bank, but they have a few $1 billion scattered all over the world. And the leader of the company is in his 80s, and 80-year-olds have an ability to change their mind. And today, when so many states are offering competing things, who says it has to stay stuck, because Austin, Texas thought they had the world headquarters. California certainly did. So a lot of this is pliable, and the people who come to Tennessee just because we have low taxes are not necessarily great Tennesseans. And I'm proud that we have relatively low taxes here. But does that make you a great Tennessean if you just like our lower tax rate? Would you move to a Caribbean island if they had an even lower tax rate? We want loyalty and we want quality of life. And Nashville Nice is in danger of perishing if we get too many people from out of town who bring their tempers and their anger with them.
Right. I'm fascinated by this idea of a larger metro. How large? How far out could it go? And what would that mean for cost of living?
Well, politically, it's very difficult, but so is Metro. How many counties?
Oh, that was a dogfight.
Yeah, it took a lot of progressive-minded folks thinking, hey, but if you understand it from a conservative standpoint, it's eliminating an entire layer of government, and that should be welcomed by everybody because that's extra overhead you can just dispense with. From an economic standpoint, it makes eminent sense because this is the one market right here. Nashville is one entity. And companies that have their offices in Williamson County or Rutherford County or Sumner County, they still say they're in Nashville, even though they're not. So the county line thing is kind of an antique agricultural concept. It has to do more with things like fire protection and easy-to-reach markets, agricultural markets, than anything else. So why not make this an economic unit and have this, because Nashville was a pathbreaker in the 60s. Are we still? Because Nashville as a city is really not growing that fast. The metropolitan area is growing like a weed. Pretty soon Murfreesboro is going to be bigger than Nashville. So, and we don't want to take anything away from these high-growth ring counties, but Nashville has oftentimes become a nonprofit center and a governmental center, and neither one of those folks pay taxes. So we have the airport and we have the sports stadiums, but who's paying the taxes here? It ends up being a lot of homeowners, the ones who can afford to remain. So to me, it's political entities have to keep up with the times. And we kept up with the times in the 60s. In fact, we were ahead of our times, but I'm not sure that we're doing that today.
Let's get back to some local issues that you had very interesting ideas about back when you were in office, one of them being flood control. We all remember 2010. Or I hope we remember it, because we need to learn from it, and it doesn't need to happen again, and I'm not so sure it won't.
Mm-hmm. The Army Corps of Engineers asked to build a levee or dike right at Lower Broadway to protect Lower Broadway, and we all know how valuable that is. And guess what? That was never built. That would have been ugly. But it would have protected some of the most valuable economic property in all of Tennessee.
Yeah, there was water in the Skirmerhorn Center.
Oh my gosh. Nothing below the Ryman was really safe, because that's why the Ryman was built kind of up on the hill. But what are we doing about it? We're turning a blind eye. We're forgetting. Oh, that can't happen again. In the 70s, we had 2 500-year floods within 2 weeks of each other. So the Cumberland River is the most volatile navigable waterway in the United States. People forget that. We think it's just a river, but it goes up and down a whole lot. One thing I did in Congress was to get Priest Lake and Old Hickory Lake as flood control lakes, because believe it or not, that was illegal to use those dams to protect the city.
Really?
Yeah. It's a crazy 1940s law that said, oh, you can use it for power generation or recreation,
but not
for flood control.
Huh.
Now, it's hard to time things, but if you have better weather prediction, you're able to better protect the city. But the city should be protecting itself. And it just so happens, if you fly into Nashville, you see all these rock quarries all over town. They happen to be conveniently located next to creeks, and they could easily become emergency lakes so that our creeks, when they overflow, instead of damaging homes and businesses, could just flood the quarries. And then we could pay the quarry owners for pumping out there. This happened by accident in the Richland Creek quarry, and it looked like Niagara Falls. Wow. It took 9 months to pump out that quarry, but it also saved West Nashville because it immediately lowered the creek levels by like 10 feet or something. It was just amazing, the effect. So it's a nice coincidence we already have these giant holes in the ground. We don't want to hurt quarry owners' businesses, but during a genuine emergency, why not allow those quarries to be used as emergency lakes? There are ways to do that, and that's essentially free because the quarries are right next to the creeks. You could have an easy spillway once it got to absurd flood level, and just spill over into but we've made no headway persuading the Army Corps of Engineers to do things like this. But to me, they're aware of the danger, but they only wanted a dike downtown, which we're not going to get according to the city council. So if you can't get that, well, then let's have a backup plan.
Yeah. How expensive would that be? Did you ever put a price tag on it or even ballpark it?
I went to talk to the quarry owners, and they're good citizens. They don't want the city to be ruined. We nearly lost Metro Center because fortunately the Army Corps of Engineers had raised the levee there just a few years before the flood, but we could have lost $4 or $5 billion worth of property there if it had been allowed to flood. Mm-hmm. And all it takes is one leak. It's like the little Dutch boy. Once it starts breaking through, the whole thing goes. And it's a mighty river at flood stage, and we need to be aware of that.
Speaking of deep holes in the ground, what do you think about the boring company and the tunneling project and the fact that the public was caught by surprise?
Well, procedurally, it's an outrage just to have a billionaire, multi-billionaire, maybe a trillionaire waltz into town and do whatever he wants with the city. Technically, it's fascinating because I hope that somebody can figure out a way to tunnel through limestone. But we're also a science experiment because they've admitted they don't really know how to do it. I hope they can because Lord knows we're blessed with limestone all over Middle Tennessee. Years ago, we nearly got a massive federal project here called the Superconducting Supercollider, which is going to be a 60-mile underground racetrack for atoms and atomic particles to understand the nature of the universe. That ended up not being built anywhere in America, and it ended up built in Switzerland or someplace. But the need for tunneling is an important one, and if there's a new technology, I personally admire SpaceX. I think that's amazing because Elon Musk has made NASA look a little bit old and slow, coming up with rockets that actually work and are workhorses. And now he's a controversial character and is getting more so with every year. But we can also learn from that example because all pioneers are deeply flawed. You know, starting with before Christopher Columbus, they have problems, but these are strange people. That's why they're pioneers. And we need those folks. We need their genius. We just need to temper it a little bit so that we can all benefit from their discoveries.
Yeah. On the brighter side, you remarried after losing your wife to a long illness. Is that something you ever saw in the tea leaves?
Well, I had no idea, but then no one anticipates Alzheimer's either. Right. You know, if you're going to get it, maybe you get it in your 90s if you're lucky enough to live that long. But my wife got it in their 50s, and it was a long 15-year process. Of course, at first there was a lot of denial and anger. It's like the 5 stages of grief thing. And I think it was hardest on my kids because really for much of their lives, all they knew was a diminished mom who really couldn't read a book. And then toward the end, she couldn't remember their names. Now, she was always cheerful. We were very blessed that way because she would look at me. She loved to drive around. And it didn't matter how bumpy the road was. And she'd just say, "This is fun. This makes me wiggle." You know, like most people complain about the road or the suspension or the driving or something like that. She was always positive. And, you know, I had a lot of yard signs out in my campaigns. And she'd look at a yard sign and she'd say, "You know, I like that Jim Cooper fellow. What do you think of him?" And I said, "Well, I'm kind of fond of him too." But it's just that sort of naive, innocent, welcoming to the world. She totally loved birds. And that was a great gift because she could always look outside and spot a bird or see a bird feeder. So it's a great blessing to have that positive outlook because some people with Alzheimer's lose their personalities.
Yeah.
So, but I was fortunate. An old neighbor, it turned out that her husband died of almost the same thing at about the same time. So he didn't have as easy a version as my wife did, but we found each other and got together. But it turned out that my first wife, Martha, had given this woman, Mary Falls, our baby cribs when she had twins.
Really?
They lived right across the street. And well, I knew them a little bit, but not really. But they needed baby cribs, and we had some, so boom, there they were. So it was... It's kind of like the great chain of being or something. Life is good. And what matters is that people are nice and work through problems together. That's what makes a great family, a great marriage, and a great city.
Yeah. You're teaching, well, you've been teaching for a long time, but you're kind of back in the working world by not necessarily choice, but by necessity.
Well, I've been super blessed in life. In fact, I might be the luckiest person to have ever lived. But being a good student, it's easy for me, and I love sharing what I know. And hopefully they can take what I know and do far, far better. Because all of life is about learning, and we all need to be lifelong learners. And it's amazing what's out there. For a while, I was worried about books no longer being published. Now there are fewer published, but the ones that are out there are extraordinary. So when people go to bookstores, whether it's Parnassus or another bookstore, or whether they shop in another way, it's amazing the richness. But I run into more and more people who don't know what's even in their own field. I taught healthcare law and policy for 20 years at Vanderbilt Business School, and I was always amazed how many physicians and hospital administrators didn't know what was going on in their own profession. And all you have to do is read the book. It's not hard. At one point, Tommy Frist actually bought like a couple thousand copies of a book by a Harvard Business School professor, Regina Herzlinger, and wanted everybody in Nashville to read it because it was about the profession, and it was a fundamental critique of healthcare. And I may have been the only person who read it, but it's still a super important book. And it points out certain fundamental problems in healthcare that we still have. And this was a book printed in the 70s. Like, why haven't we fixed those problems now?
Right.
Because so many people don't want to. And as I say, my greatest fear is a sort of bipartisan cahoots thing where both parties ignore the problem, and then it's not on the public radar screen. So often the public only notices things when the parties fight. And that's a good way of surfacing issues so that the public can pay attention and hopefully weigh in on the better side.
You know, I believe that not everyone is innately competitive. Not everyone likes to be on one team versus another team. Yet we've set everything up these days, at least in the moment we're living in, that competition is king. Is that healthy?
Well, you're a woman, I'm a guy. It's kind of a guy thing. You know, guys love sports. They love competition. They love winners and losers. I always was amazed if you can win a race by a millisecond and you're still the winner. Everybody else is a loser. Well, they were only a millisecond behind, and sometimes if the photo finish, it's hard to tell. Now, our founders were mainly guys too, and they were competitive. And James Madison said among them that ambition should be made to counteract ambition. He thought that was the only way to keep people honest, because you really couldn't trust people to listen to the better angels of their nature. You had to have other folks out there trying to take them down so that hopefully the public could decide who's the better candidate or the better office holder. So it's hard to keep people honest. And since Roman times, we've had this question, who is going to govern the governors? And that's been hard. But the Romans started the Senate. You know, it didn't last as long as it probably should have, but the popular will has been the ultimate power in the fortunate countries that are called democracies. And we're really a republic. Popular will is filtered through elected representatives. But the idea is to try to get wisdom. How do you distill wisdom from a lot of grain? It's not like making bourbon whiskey. You know, that's an easy chemical process. With ideas, it's harder. But you have to have a public marketplace of ideas. Journalism is essential. I started out in life wanting to be a journalist.
Yeah, you were editor of the school paper, huh?
Yeah, I love that. This was a little bit, I was more print-oriented than electronic. You were way ahead of your time, Demetria. But freedom of information is probably the most important thing in the world, because that's what got mankind out of caves. That's what developed all of our institutions, most of which, by the way, were formed in medieval times. That's what developed markets. And that's what's giving us what people call these godlike technologies, which are just so extraordinary. They're almost beyond comprehension. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, a lot of things in biology are just beyond extraordinary. And we're fortunate to live in this time. But we need to bend those inventions to human use and not have them dominate us.
It's Banner and Company, and my guest is former Tennessee Democratic Congressman Jim Cooper. We'll be right back. What's the most out-of-character thing Jim Cooper has ever done?
Probably go to Lower Broadway. I know. I'm not a big partier. I'm more of a library person. But I do like to, certain things are fun. To go to the Skirmerhorn is amazing. To go to the Ryman is amazing. I like a small music venue. The Bluebird's my favorite, of course. And to be blessed like we are with music here, I'm a closet banjo player and have been forever. I just was born loving the twang, and I was so lucky one time I got a banjo lesson from Earl Scruggs himself.
Oh my gosh.
It's that was really a blessing. His wife Louise was a tough character, but Earl could not have been sweeter. And as a genius to invent an entire type of music, now it was largely an African-American instrument back in the old days, and Rhiannon Giddens is helping celebrate that heritage. But for him to invent the fast five-finger roll is just an amazing thing. And he was just a factory worker in North Carolina, but an utter genius.
I mean, can you throw down some flat Scruggs?
No. My fingers aren't as nimble as they used to be, and they're never great. But that's why when you see a genuine talent, and so many people come to Nashville with that talent, they can't even read sheet music. They don't need to. They feel it in their bones. There's a guy here in town, his name is Keb Mo. He may be the most musical person I've ever seen. Like, every fiber of his body is musical. And he can be humming, he can be tapping his foot, he can be walking down the street, and it is musical. It's just unbelievable to stand in line at a movie theater here or at a concert, and you might be next to Emmylou Harris. You might be next to Nicole Kidman. You have no idea who you're next to. I was at a Bluebird thing, and next to me was Martina McBride. She was there to get new material because the folks whose trailer burned down are singing to you. They're not as pretty as the artists. They're not as, don't have the range necessarily in their voices. But their mother was the one arrested, it's just, they feel the pain. They feel the joy. And translating that to mass audiences is really the genius of Nashville. It's what separates us. I think Carl Dean said that Nashville without country music would be Birmingham. And Birmingham's fine, but it's not Nashville.
You taught me how to say, I don't know if it was you exactly, but I was taught very early how to say Shelbyville.
Shelbyville.
You got to kind of swallow it.
Yeah, it's like a garden implement or something. Or there's Fayetteville,
Hand me that
too.
Shelbyville.
And that's Fayetteville.
Yeah.
Where are you from, Fayetteville? But no, slurring your words is not really a good idea, but that was the first question my first grade teacher asked in class. Mrs. Beachboard said, students, how do we pronounce the name of our town? And everybody said, Shelbyville. So she said, no, it's Shelbyville, because she was teaching us how to spell. And then after that, everybody went back to Shelbyville.
Banner and Company is a production of the New Nashville Banner. This episode is produced by Steve Haruch and edited by me. The original music is by Verlin Thompson. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or go to NashvilleBanner.com. You're in good company. Our final question's in the fishbowl.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a little tradition we have here, and
okay. Let's see what this says here. I'll have to get out my reading glasses to see this one.
Hey, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
We all use them.
I had cataract surgery a couple of years ago. And
Did it work?
The greatest operation in the world. It's just unbelievably powerful. From Sharon Robertson, why are people
who are privileged either so angry or so afraid?
That's a great question. And Sharon is a great person. The answer is, to me, that we are all privileged. Just to live in America is an unbelievable privilege. Half the world's trying to get here because they want some of what we've got. But I think for everyone who does live here, especially those higher up on the economic scale, somehow it's fashionable today to believe that you're a victim. Everybody wants to feel sorry for themselves. And I actually think that's pathetic when, if you have a true sense of things, we're all blessed. We're all staggeringly lucky. None of us would want to trade places with anybody in prior history. I can remember growing up, I grew up in a privileged house, but we didn't have air conditioning. I'd go visit people in Nashville who had central heat and air, and I thought they lived in a refrigerator. I'd go to the bathroom, and their toilet seats were cold. It was terrible. In my house, toilet seats were always warm.
As it should be.
We did have a window air conditioner, and we could turn it on after 10 o'clock at night. And that was air conditioning. And see, for kids today, that would be like, you couldn't recruit any kid to come to Vanderbilt if that was the condition. Now it's all like country club, and there's so many ironies in life. The people who have the biggest houses have the fewest family members, and their houses get bigger as they age when their houses are less crowded. I have a friend here in town who built a brand new house. It was like at least 10,000 square feet when they had no kids. They were all empty nesters. And like, why do people do this stuff? So much of what we do in life is counterproductive, when if we just took care of each other, took care of our fellow man, watched out for each other, we'd all be better off.